Welcome back. Before tonight's story starts, I'd really appreciate your support. If these videos keep you coming back, don't forget to leave a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe. Now let's get into tonight's nightmare. The old men were already waiting when I pulled into the gravel lot behind the district hall, and that alone told me more than anything they were about to say. 5 of them. Folding chairs arranged in a half circle against the back wall where the October sun had not yet reached. The air was thin and sharp, the kind that settles into your knuckles and stays there. Their faces had the same texture as the country outside the window, cut and folded and weathered until you could no longer tell which lines belonged to age and which belonged to wind. They had not called the tribal police. They had not called the district office in Kyle. They had asked for me by name, and a man does not get asked for by name because somebody knocked over a fence post or wandered off a marked trail. I had worn the badge for 8 years by then. My grandfather carried something like it before me. Back when the work had no title and no salary and no radio, when it was simply understood that certain men knew the land and kept watch over it. He taught me to track. He taught me to read a bent stem and a scuff in the dust and know what had passed and how long ago it had gone. He told me the hills are always saying something, and that a man who listens can walk anywhere, while a man who only hears will walk straight into the ground. He also taught me there are places you do not go once the light is gone, places where the wind changes its voice. I did not believe all of it. Not then. Silas Bear Runner spoke first. He was the eldest of them, 85 if he was a day, and his hands trembled slightly where they rested on the head of his walking stick. "Sit down," he said. "We need to talk about Wolfjaw Ridge." Wolfjaw, a run of pine-covered hills about 12 miles north, riding the boundary line where the reservation gives way to open grazing country. Good country if you like being alone. Almost nobody went up there anymore. "What is happening on Wolfjaw?" I asked, taking the empty chair they had set out for me. The old men traded a look. It was the kind of look that passes between people who have known each other their whole lives, who can hold an entire conversation without opening their mouths. "Wendell Swift-Bird's boy went missing up there 3 nights ago," Silas said. "Went out bow hunting. Never came back. They found his truck yesterday morning on the old logging road. Driver's door standing open, engine still running. His bow was in the bed, quiver full. He had not loosed a single arrow. Missing persons are not unusual out here." This reservation covers something close to 3,500 square miles of the emptiest country in South Dakota. People get turned around. People get hurt. Sometimes they die of exposure before anyone reaches them. But something in the way Silas laid it out put a crawl across the back of my neck. "Search and rescue is already on it," I said. "I heard it come over the radio yesterday. They have teams working the area." "They will not find him." That was Franklin Yellow Elk, who almost never spoke unless the thing he had to say could not wait. "Not where he went." "Where did he go?" Another exchange of looks. "You remember what your grandfather told you," Silas said. It was not a question. "About the Still Ones." The name went through me like cold water down a collar. I had not heard it spoken aloud in years, not since my grandfather died when I was 19. He had mentioned them a handful of times, always late, always with that particular flatness in his voice that meant the story was not only a story. "He told me some things," I said carefully. "Old warnings. Places to stay out of." "Your grandfather was the last ranger who understood," Franklin said. "The last one who took the old knowledge as knowledge and not as a bedtime story. Since he passed, the young ones who wear that badge believe everything has an explanation. Science and logic, modern thinking. He shook his head slowly. But the land has not changed. What lives on it has not changed. What exactly are you asking me to do? Silas leaned forward on his stick. We are asking you to remember what your grandfather taught you. We are asking you to be careful when you go up to Wolfjaw, because you will go up to Wolfjaw. We know you. And we are asking you to come back down and tell us what you found, even if you do not understand it. Especially if you do not understand it, Franklin added. The third elder, Oliver Little Thunder, spoke for the first time. His voice was barely above a breath. The still ones walk that ridge now. They were quiet a long time. Something has woken them, or something has called them. We do not know which, but they are moving again. I do not know what you mean by the still ones, I said. And part of me knew that was a lie even as it left my mouth. Part of me remembered my grandfather talking about places where the quiet gets too deep, where even the birds will not sing. You will, Silas said. Just give us your word you will not go up there at night. And if the wind stops while you are standing on that ridge, you turn around that same second. You do not wait. You do not look for the cause. You leave. Do you understand me? How will I know? If the wind stops, you will know. Everything goes still at once. No air moving, no animals, nothing at all. When that happens, they are close, and you need to already be gone. I wanted to ask more. I wanted them to hand me something solid, something I could write in a report. But I had grown up around these men long enough to understand that certain knowledge arrives in its own time and in its own way. They had given me what they were able to give. I will be careful, I said. You have my word. Your grandfather would want you to come home, Silas said. Honor him. Be smart. I walked out of the district hall with more questions than I had brought in, and with a cold weight low in my stomach that had nothing to do with October. That afternoon, I drove up to Wolfjaw to look in on the search. The day was clear and bright, temperature in the low 60s, the sort of autumn weather that lets a person forget what is coming behind it. The logging road where they had found the truck was crawling with people. Volunteers, tribal police, even a pair of county deputies who had driven in from the next jurisdiction over. I parked behind the line of vehicles and found the search coordinator, a man named Dale Prentice, who I had worked alongside twice before. Anything? I asked. Dale shook his head. He looked worn thin and out of patience with himself. Nothing. It is like he stepped sideways out of the world. We have got dogs. We have got thermal. We have covered a 5-mile radius off that truck, and there is not a trace. No prints, no broken brush, no blood, no torn fabric, nothing. What about the truck itself? Anything strange? Only what I already told the tribal police. Engine running, door open, keys in the ignition, wallet and phone sitting on the seat, bow and arrows untouched. He walked away from everything except the clothes on his back. Sign of a struggle? That is the part that keeps me up. No, everything neat. Everything in order. Like he stepped out to take a leak and simply never came back. Dale reached into a case and lifted out an evidence bag with the phone inside it. Except this. Battery reads full. It will not power on, and it will not take a charge. The technician says it looks like the circuit's cooked, but there is no burn, no swelling, no water, nothing you can point at. I turned the bag over in my hands. The phone looked ordinary. It looked brand new. Can I have a look at the truck? Be my guest. We already processed it. Caleb Swiftbird's truck was a newer Chevrolet, well kept. The interior clean the way a young man keeps a vehicle he is still proud of. I walked a slow circle around it, watching the ground and watching the angle of things, trying to put the pieces into an order that made sense. The driver's door hung open at maybe 40 degrees. The engine had run for at least a full day before somebody found it and shut it down, so there was no honest way to calculate how long the boy had been gone. I climbed into the driver's seat and sat there and tried to put myself behind his eyes. Young man, middle 20s, from a family of good hunters. He parks. He leaves the engine running for some reason. He gets out. He leaves his phone. He leaves his bow. Why? And then I noticed it. The quiet. The search teams were maybe 100 yards down the road, calling to one another, radios crackling. But sitting in that seat, I could not hear any of it. I could not hear anything. No air in the pines, no birds, no insects. Not one sound in the entire world. I got out of that truck faster than I want to admit, and the moment my boots hit the road, the noise came back. Volunteers shouting. A radio, wind moving in the branches like it had never stopped. My grandfather's voice came up out of somewhere I had buried it. When the quiet comes, they are already near. I spent the rest of the afternoon walking grid patterns through the pines, calling Caleb's name, turning up nothing. When the sun started leaning toward the western hills, Dale called it. "We resume at 7 tomorrow," he announced. "Anybody who can come back, come back." I walked to my vehicle while the teams packed up. The shadows had gone long, reaching across the forest floor like fingers, and I caught myself walking faster than the situation called for. Caught myself glancing over my shoulder at the tree line. On the drive back down the logging road, I kept the windows rolled up, even though the evening was mild. I told myself it was the dust. It was not the dust. I did not want to hear the quiet if it came back. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold in front of me, and my grandfather's journal stacked at my elbow. He had kept careful notes across all his years on the job, filling leather-bound notebooks with observations, tracks, weather, incidents, whatever crossed his path. I inherited them when he died, and I had barely opened them since. Most of what I remembered reading struck me at 20 as the wandering of an old man who had spent too many seasons alone in the backcountry. That night I was hunting for one thing. I found it on page 47 of the third notebook, dated August of 1979. Investigated report of missing horses near Wolfjaw, found tracks going into the pines, lost them after a quarter mile where the ground turns to rock, found something else instead. A ring of stones in a small clearing, laid out in a pattern I know from the old stories, and in the middle of the ring, one deer dead. Not a mark on it anywhere. Heart simply stopped. That is when I heard it, or did not hear it. The quiet came down over that clearing like a wool blanket. No wind, no birds, nothing. I left fast, and I am not going back. Whatever the still ones are, they are real, and that ground belongs to them now. I turned the page. The next entry said a week later. Spoke with the elders about what I found. They tell me these still ones are watchers, beings that live at the edge of what a person is able to perceive. They do not speak, and they make no sound, and where they walk the world holds its breath. They say the still ones were here long before our people, long before any people. Most of the time, they keep to their own ground. Sometimes they move into ours. Why, no one could tell me, or no one would. I was told to mark that area restricted and keep people out of it. I agreed. I kept turning. There were scattered references all through the later notebooks. Every time somebody reported something strange on Wolfjaw, my grandfather went up and looked, and every time he came back down with the same two things written in his hand. That unnatural quiet, and the feeling of being studied by something that would not quite show itself. His last entry about them was dated 3 months before he died. The still ones are moving again. I can feel it. The ground they occupy is widening, taking in more country than it did when I was young. I do not know what that means, and I am too old now to chase it. I hope whoever comes behind me has the sense to listen to the elders. I hope he remembers the old warnings. The land keeps its secrets, but some of those secrets are the only thing keeping us alive. I closed the notebook and looked out the kitchen window at the yard. My own reflection looked back at me from the glass, and for half a second, I thought there was something standing behind my shoulder, a shape that held itself too still. I turned around. The room was empty. I did not sleep much. The next morning, I was back on Wolfjaw before the search teams arrived. I told myself I was getting an early start. The truth is, I wanted to see that country in the gray light before it filled up with people and voices and boots. I parked where Caleb's truck had been and walked in carrying nothing but my radio, my sidearm, and my grandfather's brass compass. The morning was cold and still, mist lying in the low ground between the trunks. I moved slowly and looked at everything. The floor was thick with needles, which is poor ground for tracking, but I had been taught to read the small disturbances, the places where needles are brushed aside or pressed flat. About a quarter mile off the road, I found something. Not footprints, impressions. A pattern of disturbed earth and needles that suggested something had moved through, but the pattern did not match any gait I recognized. They were roughly the size of a boot, but spaced far too wide for a man to stride, and they did not sink deep enough to belong to anything the weight of Caleb's swift bird. Stranger than that, they got lighter as they went. Most tracks deepen when the maker tires. These faded, as though whatever left them was becoming less substantial with every step it took. I followed them another 100 yards, and they brought me to a clearing. 30 feet across, no more, ringed with old-growth pine that choked off most of the light. In the center sat a ring of stones, exactly as my grandfather had described it. And inside the ring, nothing at all. No animal, no sign of anything. Just bare earth that looked as if it had not been touched in a generation. But the air was wrong. Heavy. The way air sits before a storm, and except the sky above the treetops, was a flat, clean blue. I stayed at the edge and tried to make sense of what I was looking at. The reasonable part of my mind said stones are stones. Kids could have set them. Somebody from one of the districts could have laid them for a ceremony. We use stone circles for a dozen purposes. Markers, wheels, memorials. This did not feel like any of those. I pulled out my phone to photograph the ring and saw there was no signal. That is not unusual up in those hills, though I had held 2 bars a quarter mile back. I tried anyway. The phone made a sound I had never heard it make. Not the shutter, a low buzz that went through my jaw and set my back teeth aching. The screen went black. I pressed the power button. Nothing. Held it. Nothing. That is when the quiet came. It was like a hand had reached out and shut off the world. The wind died in the middle of a gust. The birds calling somewhere off to the east, cut out between one note and the next. Even my own breathing came back to me muffled and far away, as though I were listening to it from underwater. When the quiet comes, they are already near. I turned slowly, sweeping the tree line. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound. But I had the whole and total certainty that I was being looked at by something that had all the time in the world to look. Something studying me the way a researcher studies an insect held under glass. I backed out of that clearing with my eyes on the trees and my palm resting on my sidearm, and I knew even as I did it that the weapon was a comfort and nothing more. Whatever this was, a bullet had no business anywhere near the conversation. The quiet came with me. I walked faster. Then I jogged. Then I ran, crashing through brush, without any care for noise or sign or the mess I was leaving behind, wanting nothing in this world except distance. The quiet stayed with me the whole way, and then I crossed some line I could not see, and the sound of the forest slammed back into my ears all at once. Wind in the branches, my own ragged breathing, a raven complaining somewhere overhead. I stood on the logging road with my hands on my knees and tried to talk myself into believing I had scared myself over a pile of rocks. I could still feel those eyes on the back of my neck. My phone stayed dead the rest of the day. I did not wait for the search teams. I got in my vehicle and drove down off that ridge, and I told nobody what had happened, because what exactly would I have said? That I found some stones and got spooked by silence, that I felt watched by something with no face. It sounded insane inside of my own skull. It would have sounded worse out loud, but I could not put it down. That evening, I drove out to Silas Bear Runner's place. He lived on a small allotment about 5 miles from the district hall, a single wide trailer with a garden he kept better than most men keep their houses, and a traditional arbor standing in the back where he conducted ceremonies. He was sitting on the porch when I pulled in, like a man who had been expecting company for an hour. "You went to the ridge," he said. Not a question. "This morning I found a clearing, stones and a ring." He nodded slowly, and the quiet came. Exactly the way my grandfather wrote it down. Everything just stopped. Silas gestured at the empty chair beside him. I sat, and for a long stretch, neither of us said anything. We watched the hills go from gold to rust to a deep, bruised color as the sun went down behind them. "What are they?" I finally asked. "The elders speak about them like they are people." "What does that actually mean? Spirits, ghosts?" "None of those words fit," Silas said. "Our language has a term for them, but it does not carry over into English. The closest you could come is watchers, and even that is wrong. They are presences. Things that exist alongside us, usually in the places we do not go, and the hours we do not see. Most of the time, our world and theirs do not overlap. And sometimes they do. Sometimes they do. Why? We do not know. Maybe they move according to some pattern we are not built to notice. Maybe something calls them. Maybe they are drawn to certain kinds of disturbance." He turned his head and looked at me directly for the first time. "Your grandfather thought of them like smoke. You can see smoke. You can smell it. You can watch it move across a room. But close your hand on it, and there is nothing there. The still ones are like that, present without being solid, visible without being real, at least not real the way you and I use the word." "Caleb Swiftbird," I said. "Did they take him?" "Take is not the right word. But yes, he met them and he did not come back." "Will we find his body?" Silas was quiet a long time. "Maybe. Eventually. But he will not look like a man who got lost or fell. There will not be an explanation that satisfies anybody." "Have you seen them?" "Once. I was younger than you are now. Hunting up in the Black Hills, got caught out past sundown, made camp in a little canyon with a fire going. The night started ordinary. Stars, wind, coyotes carrying on somewhere, south of me. Then everything stopped. The fire kept burning, but I could not hear the flames anymore. I could not hear anything. And I looked up and they were there. What did they look like? That is the trouble. I cannot describe them properly, because every time I reach for the memory, the picture slides out from under my hand. Tall, I think. Or maybe they only seemed tall because of the way they held themselves. They stood right at the edge of my firelight, 3 of them, maybe 4, completely motionless, not breathing, not swaying, not shifting weight the way any living thing does, just standing, watching. What did you do? I sat there until sunrise, did not move, barely let myself blink, and when the sky went gray, they were not there anymore. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. But I knew, the way you know a thing in your bones, that if I had run, if I had shown them fear or reached for the rifle, I would not have come down out of that canyon. What would they have done? Nobody who provokes them comes back to say. A chill worked its way down between my shoulder blades. So what am I supposed to do? The teams are going back up tomorrow. People are going to keep looking for that boy. I cannot stop them. No, but you can keep them alive. The still ones do not seem to trouble people who stay on the paths, who keep out of their ground. It is when a person wanders into their country, when a person goes where he was told not to go, that is when things happen. How do I know where their ground ends? You already know. You felt it this morning. That clearing is one of their places. Your grandfather marked others in those notebooks of his. You will learn to read the signs. The quiet is the plainest one. But there are others. Places where the trees grow wrong. Places animals will not cross. Places where the light sits differently on the ground and you cannot say why. Oh, I thought about those impressions in the needles, the way they thinned out to nothing. I found marks, like footprints, but not too light. The spacing was all wrong. Silas nodded. They leave traces sometimes, not tracks the way you and I mean tracks, more like echoes. Places where they pressed hard enough against our world to leave a bruise on it. Those marks do not follow the rules. Sometimes they appear where nothing walked. Sometimes they lead nowhere at all. This is insane, I said, mostly to myself. I am a ranger. I handle fire restrictions and trail washouts, and the occasional drunk on an ATV. I am not equipped for this. Your grandfather said the same thing at the start. He learned. You will learn. What if I do not want to? Silas smiled, and there was no pleasure anywhere in it. Then you will be one more ranger who calls the old knowledge superstition. And one day you will have an encounter you cannot talk your way out of, and you will meet it with nothing in your hands. Better to learn now, while somebody is still here to teach you. I stayed at his kitchen table until well past full night, listening to stories about the still ones. Encounters going back 3 generations. Patterns the elders had noticed and argued over. Some of it sounded like the folklore every people on Earth keeps about the things that move after sundown. Some of it lined up too neatly with what I had felt standing at the edge of that clearing. One more thing, Silas said as I was pulling my coat on. The still ones do not speak. That is why we call them what we call them. But people hear things when they are close. Voices that sound familiar. Words and languages they never learned and understand anyway. Sounds that seem to start on the inside of your own head. And do not trust those voices. Do not answer them. The still ones are dangerous. Whatever speaks when they are near is worse. What speaks? We do not know. Maybe it is them finding a door. Maybe it is something else that follows them and uses their presence to reach across. Either way, if you hear a voice inside the quiet, you walk away. I drove home with that sitting on my chest, and I checked my mirror more times than the empty road deserved. The search for Caleb Swiftbird went on another full week. Every day the teams worked the ridge. Every day they came down with nothing. I joined them when I could, and I steered them the whole time. Away from the clearing. Away from anything that carried that wrongness in the air. I told myself I was being cautious and not cowardly, and most days I believed it. On the 6th day, Dale Prentice called me. "We found something," he said. "Not the boy. Something strange. Can you come up?" 20 minutes later, I was standing in a different fold of the ridge, looking at what his team had turned up. A deer, lying in a shallow depression between two boulders. At first glance, it looked asleep. When Dale nudged it with the toe of his boot, I could see it was not. No wounds, no blood, no sign of any predator, not one mark on the hide anywhere. "Heart just stopped," Dale said. "That is 4 we have found in 2 days. All inside a mile of here. All exactly the same." I thought about a line in a notebook written the year before I was born. 1 deer dead. Not a mark on it anywhere. Heart simply stopped. "Could be disease," one of the volunteers offered. "EHD, maybe." "Maybe," Dale said, and he did not sound like a man who believed it. "But I have seen EHD. It does not kill like this. There are always other signs. Swelling, fever, animals down near water. These look like somebody found a switch and flipped it." I walked a circle around the carcass, watching the soft ground beside the rocks. And there they were again. Those impressions, too light, space too wide, coming in toward the deer and going away from it, and thinning to nothing about 15 feet out. Before I go any further, let me stop and say this to you plainly, because I have been listening to that clock at the bottom of your screen the same as you have. You have been with me on this ridge for a while now, and you still have not touched a single button. Fix that. Subscribe, hit the like, and tell me in the comments what your city is and what time it is where you are sitting right now, because I want to know who is awake with me while I tell the rest of this. Do it now, before the quiet comes back, and then we will keep walking. "Dale," I said quietly, "I want you to pull the search out of the sector." "Why? This is the first real thing we have found up here." "That is exactly why. Whatever is killing these animals, I do not want a volunteer walking into it in the dusk." He gave me a long look. "They are deer, probably sick. You are not seriously suggesting." "I am suggesting we be careful. This ground is giving me a bad feeling, and I would rather work the southern sectors." Dale studied my face for what felt like a long time. Then he nodded slowly. "All right. You are the tribal ranger. If you say we stay out, we stay out. But you have to give me something better than a bad feeling for the report. Put down that the terrain is unsafe. Loose rock, fall hazard, unstable footing." I looked past him at the pines. "That is not even a lie." We moved the team south, away from the deer, away from the ring of stone, away from all of it. But I knew we were only buying days. Whatever was happening on Wolf Jaw was widening, was taking in more country. And sooner or later, we were going to run out of ground that was safe to search. That night, I was catching up on paperwork at the ranger station when the radio broke squelch. "Dispatch to Ranger Ironcloud." "Go ahead, dispatch." "We have a report of lights on Wolfjaw. Caller says she has been watching them about an hour, moving through the trees over near the old Ash Fork Creek crossing. Could be kids. Could be somebody camping where they should not be. Can you take a look?" Ash Fork Creek, 2 miles from the ring of stones, sitting right in the middle of the country where the deer had been dropping. "Copy that. En route." I should have called for backup. I should have waited for daylight. I should have done a great many things differently that night. But I was the tribal ranger, and it was my patrol area, and I had spent 2 weeks flinching at shadows and quiet. And somewhere in me a stubbornness had built up that was stronger than my sense. The drive up took 30 minutes. By the time I killed the engine at the access road, it was past 10, and there was no moon at all. I sat there a moment with the window down, listening. Ordinary night, wind moving high in the pines, an owl working somewhere off to the west, the tick of my engine cooling. I took my flashlight and my radio and started walking toward the coordinates. The beam cut a narrow tunnel through the trees, lighting up trunks and rock and brush. I called out twice, announced myself, asked if anybody was out there. Nothing came back. 15 minutes in, following an old game trail deeper than I had any business going, I saw them. Lights exactly as the caller had said. But they were not campfires, and they were not flashlights. They were globes. Soft spheres of bluish-white hanging in the air between the trunks, drifting in patterns that looked almost rehearsed. I stopped walking and I watched them. They moved through the timber about 50 yards ahead of me, sliding out from behind one tree and vanishing behind the next, never once making a sound. There were 5 or 6, ranging from the size of a basketball up to something closer to a beach ball. And the way they moved was not aimless. They were quartering the ground, working it in overlapping arcs, the way a hound works a field. They were hunting. The word arrived on its own and brought a wave of very old fear with it, the kind that lives underneath thought. I took one step backward and my boot caught a root. I stumbled, caught myself on a trunk, and when I looked up again, every one of those lights had stopped moving. They had turned toward me, all of them at once. I do not know how a thing without a face turns toward you, but there was no mistaking it. The quiet came down. I did not think. I did not plan. I turned and I ran. Behind me, I could feel them coming, could sense them gliding through the trees with that same smooth, deliberate grace. My beam swung wild, throwing light across bark and stone and my own breath, fogging in air that had gone suddenly, brutally cold. Something said my name. Not aloud. It did not come through my ears. It formed somewhere behind them, a sound like wind combing through dead grass, like the static between 2 stations on an old radio, like somebody I had known well and could not quite place. Wesley. I ran harder, branches tore at my sleeves and my face, and I did not slow down for any of it. The lights kept pace, easy, casual, their glow flickering off the trunks to my left and my right, and I could feel the cold of them pressing against my back like an open door in winter. Wesley. Stop running. Clearer now. Almost familiar. It sounded like my grandfather. I did not stop. Do not answer them. The still ones are dangerous. Whatever speaks when they are near is worse. I broke out of the tree line onto the access road at a dead sprint. The lights came out of the timber behind me and spread into a wide arc, moving to cut across the road ahead of me, and I understood with complete clarity that they were trying to close the gap between me and my vehicle. I got there first. Yanked the door, threw myself across the seat, hauled it shut behind me. The engine caught on the first turn. I dropped it into reverse and went backward down that road 100 yards before I found a wide spot and swung the truck around. In the mirror, I could see them standing at the edge of the road, just standing, watching me go. And behind the lights, just before the road bent and took the whole scene out of view, I saw something else. Shapes, tall and thin and standing among the glows, holding themselves with an absolute stillness that no living body can manage. Not swaying, not shifting, not breathing. I had finally seen them, and they had seen me. I did not report any of it. Not to dispatch, not to Dale Prentice, not in my log. What would I have written? That I fled from lights in the woods. That I heard a voice and panicked, like a boy afraid of an unlit hallway. But I drove straight to Silas Bear Runner's house, and it was near midnight when I got there. He came to the door in a robe, took one look at my face, and stood aside. "Come in. I'll put coffee on." We sat at his kitchen table, and I told him all of it. The lights, the voice, the shapes at the road. He listened without once interrupting, his face grave in the lamplight. "They are active," he said when I finally ran out of words. "More active than I have known them to be in 40 years. Something has stirred them and made them bold." What could do that? Hard to say. Sometimes it is a natural cycle, the way animals migrate or den up. Sometimes it is because a person disturbs something he should have left alone. Sometimes there is no reason we are capable of following. He refilled his cup. But this, lights moving openly through the timber, voices calling a man by name, shapes letting themselves be seen, that worries me. They stay hidden even when they are at their strongest. Caleb Swiftbird. Do you think he disturbed something? Possible. Or he was simply in the wrong stretch of country on the wrong night. They do not always need a reason to take an interest in a person. Take an interest, I repeated. You make it sound like they are studying us. Maybe they are. We study animals. We watch them. We count them. We track their movements and try to understand what they do and why. Perhaps the still ones do the same with us. My skin crawled. So what do? I cannot avoid Wolfjaw forever. It is part of my patrol. No, but you can be intelligent about when and how you go up there. Daylight only, never alone, and carry protection. Protection? I nearly laughed at him. Like what? Sage and sweetgrass? No disrespect, but I do not think smoke is going to stop those things. Silas did not smile. Sage and sweetgrass are not smoke. They are tools, and they work in the hands of people who understand them. But that is not what I meant. He got up, went into a back room, and came out with a small leather pouch on a braided cord. "This is what your grandfather carried. I have been holding it for you." I took it. It was warm, the way a stone is warm after a day in the sun, and it smelled faintly of tobacco and cedar. What is in it? Medicine. Prayers. Protection blessed by people who know how to walk near the edge and come back. It will not make you invisible to them. It might make you less interesting, less easy to reach. I wanted to set it down. I wanted to file it under superstition and go home. But I had just run from floating lights and heard my dead grandfather call my name in the timber. I was in no position to file anything anywhere. "Thank you," I said, and put the cord over my head. "There is one more thing you need to know," Silas said. "The new moon is in 3 days. That is when they are strongest. When whatever separates their country from ours is at its thinnest. If you intend to look for that boy, if you intend to understand what is happening on that ridge, you do it before the new moon." "And after?" He shook his head slowly. "After, you stay off that ground until the moon comes back." 3 days. The search would almost certainly be called off by then anyway. It had been close to 2 weeks, and the truth of it had begun to settle over everybody involved. Caleb Swiftbird was not walking down off that ridge, but I had 3 days to find out what was actually up there. I spent the following morning at the tribal library going through records. If something had woken the still ones, if something had stirred them into moving, then maybe somebody had written it down without understanding what they were writing about. The librarian was a woman named Naomi Whirlwind Horse. She helped me pull archived newspapers and tribal council minutes and stacked them on the table beside me until I ran out of table. "What exactly are you after?" she asked, setting down another armload of folders. "Any unusual activity on Wolfjaw?" construction, ceremonies, survey work, anything that might have disturbed the ground up there. She thought about it with her hand still on the folders. There was that development survey last spring. A company wanted to put in a resort, ecotourism, cabins, guided trail rides, that whole idea. They did soil testing, ground-penetrating radar, the entire package. The council shut it down fairly quickly, but by then they had already put in a good deal of work up there. Where exactly? She pulled a map up on her computer and turned the monitor toward me. Here, this section. That is where most of this survey work was concentrated. I went cold from the collarbone down. She was pointing at the exact stretch of ground where I had found the ring of stones. Do you have their reports? Anything they filed with the council should be in this stack somewhere. She dug for a minute and came up with a thick folder. Here. Thornbury Development Group. Proposal for the Wolf Jaw Wilderness Resort. I opened it on the table and started turning pages. Soil samples, environmental impact language, terrain maps, water table estimates. And then I found a section headed Archaeological Anomalies. During ground-penetrating radar survey, we detected several unusual formations beneath the surface in grid sections A7 through A12. These formations appear to be artificially constructed stone chambers or cairns, possibly of significant age. We recommend further archaeological investigation prior to any development activity. Stone chambers, underground, directly beneath the ground where the still ones were most active. Did anybody follow up on this, I asked? Not that I ever heard. The whole project died before they got that far. Why do you ask? Just trying to understand the country better. Can I copy this? I walked out of the library with a folder under my arm, and my phone rang before I reached the truck. Dale Prentice. We are standing down, he said, no preamble. 2 weeks, no sign of him, no new leads, nothing to work with. The family has accepted it. We will leave the case open, but active searching is finished. I understand. For what it is worth, Wesley, I am sorry we could not bring him home. I know what you put into it. Yeah, I said. Me too. After he hung up, I sat in the cab with the folder open on the passenger seat and read that paragraph 3 more times. Stone chambers under the earth, right where they walked. Had the survey broken something open? Had all that radar and all that drilling reached down and knocked on a door that had been sealed for a very long time? I thought about the ring, those stones set with such deliberate care. What if they were not markers at all? What if they were lids? There was one way to know. That afternoon, I went back up to Wolfjaw. It was 2 days before the new moon, and Silas Bear Runner's warning was running through my head the entire drive, and I went anyway. I parked on the logging road and walked in along the same route. The afternoon had gone gray, cloud rolling in low from the west, and the wind carried an edge that promised rain or something colder. The clearing looked the way it always looked. Stones in a ring, bare ground in the center. But now that I knew to look, I could see the shallow dish in the middle of that bare ground, the way the earth had settled, the way it does when there is a hollow underneath it. I walked the perimeter of the ring, studying the stones one at a time. They were not random. Everyone had been chosen for its shape and set with intention, and in the weathered faces half swallowed by lichen, I could make out marks, not erosion, carvings, symbols worn nearly smooth by however many hundreds of winters had passed over them. I took out my phone, remembering how it had died here before, and to my surprise, it woke right up. Camera open, shutter clicked, images saved. I took dozens. The stones, the carvings, the dish in the center. And that is when I noticed what I had walked past twice already. On the far side of the ring, mostly hidden behind a growth of buckbrush, there was a gap between two of the stones. Not a natural gap where a stone had settled. A deliberate opening framed on both sides, the width of a man's shoulders. I pushed the brush aside. Behind the stones was a hole in the ground, maybe 3 feet across, going straight down into black. The chambers from the survey report. This was one of them. Cold air came up out of it, and it carried a smell I could not name. Not rot, not turned earth. Something else entirely, something that set off an alarm and a part of my brain much older than language. I put my light down the hole. The beam traveled about 15 feet before it landed on a floor. The walls were smooth-worked stone, unmistakably shaped by hands, and they were covered in more of those symbols. I should have left. I should have marked the coordinates and gone down and come back with equipment and backup and somebody from the university. That is what the manual would say. That is what any sensible man does. But I was tired of running, tired of being afraid on my own patrol, tired of not understanding what was taking people off ground I was responsible for. I lowered myself into the hole. The drop at the end was manageable, 12 feet or so. I landed on stone and stood up in a chamber roughly the size of my living room. The air was still and cold and completely without movement. My beam swept the walls and the carvings came alive under it. These were nothing like the ones above. Down here, out of the wind and the rain and 1,000 years of freeze and thaw, they were as sharp as the day they were cut. They showed figures, tall figures, impossibly thin, standing in loose groups, and in front of them, smaller shapes, human shapes, engaged in every ordinary thing a person does. Hunting, dancing, carrying children, sitting in what looked like council, and the tall figures simply watched. The still ones. This chamber was about them, or it was made for them. At the far wall, a passage opened and went down at a steep angle. It was narrow enough that I had to turn my shoulders in places. Every part of my rational mind was telling me to climb back out. I kept going, pulled forward by a need to understand that had grown larger than my fear. The passage led out into a second chamber, and this one was much bigger. And here is where I found what I had come for, and what I have wished ever since that I had never seen. The chamber was full of bones, not scattered, not heaped in a corner the way an animal den fills up, arranged. Dozens of skeletons laid out in neat rows on low stone platforms, every one of them positioned identically, hands folded across the chest, all of them facing the same wall. Some were ancient, gone gray and powdery, crumbling where they lay. Some were newer, much newer. And at the far end of that chamber, on a platform set higher than the rest, a body in modern clothes. Caleb Swift-Bird's identification was still in the wallet in his back pocket. I stood there and could not make my mind close around it. 2 weeks. He had been gone 14 days, and what lay on that stone had gone far past what 14 days should do to a man, unless the cold and the dryness down there worked faster than I understood. Unless something about that place ran on a different clock than the world above it, or unless he had not died 2 weeks ago at all. Unless he had died the moment he stepped into their ground, and everything after that had happened to a body that was already finished. But how had he gotten down here? Who had carried him through that passage? Who had folded his hands and turned his face toward the wall with all the others? That is when I heard it. A sound that was not a sound. A pressure that built behind my eardrums. A frequency sitting just under hearing that made my teeth ache and pulled the edges of my vision out of focus. And the quiet came. But this time was different. This time the quiet had weight. It had a shape, and it had intent. It came down on me like something physical, pressing the air up out of my lungs, and my hands started shaking so hard the beam jumped across the walls. I spun in a full circle. The chamber was empty, but I could feel them. Down here in this space that was theirs, that had been theirs since before anybody drew a line on any map. I was the intruder. I was standing in the middle of their house with my boots on. The whispers started. Not voices. Thoughts that were not mine, arriving fully formed in a language I have never spoken and understood perfectly anyway. You should not be here. This place is not for you. Leave now or stay. My light flickered. I struck it against my palm and it steadied for maybe 2 seconds. And in those 2 seconds I saw them. They stood among the platforms, in the aisles between the rows of bones, tall past reason, thin in a way that made my mind slip off them, with proportions that hurt to hold in the eye, joints in the wrong count and the wrong places. They had no faces, or nothing that my brain would agree to call a face, and I could feel their attention on me like a weight laid across my shoulders. Not anger, something worse than anger, something patient. There were dozens of them, and they were coming closer. I ran, dropped the light, did not care. Went for the passage with both hands out in front of me, hit stone, found the opening, and started climbing. Behind me I could hear or feel or somehow simply know that they were following, not hurrying, gliding through their own country with terrible ease, the way a man walks his own hallway in the middle of the night without needing to turn on a lamp. The passage was longer going up, steeper, tighter. I tore both palms open on the rock and scraped my shoulders raw, and I did not stop for any of it, climbing toward a distant gray square of daylight that seemed to hold still no matter how hard I fought for it. I came up out of that hole into the clearing, and I kept running. Branches across my face, roots reaching for my ankles. The quiet came with me the whole way, that awful pressure that made the world feel muffled and far off, and then I crossed the line and the forest came roaring back into my ears. Wind, my own breathing, wrecked and ragged. A raven, somewhere overhead, complaining about nothing. I went down against a pine trunk and stayed there until my heart quit trying to break my ribs. When I finally made myself look back, I could see the clearing through the trunks. I could see the black mouth of the hole in the ground. And standing around it, watching me, were the still ones. In the gray afternoon light, they were less defined than they had been below, more like flaws in the air, like the shimmer over hot asphalt, shaped roughly the way a body is shaped. But they were there, solid enough to be seen, even if my mind kept refusing to finish the picture. We looked at each other for a long moment, me and them, and I understood, the way you understand a thing without anybody explaining it, that they were letting me go, not out of mercy, as a demonstration, as a lesson delivered in the only language they had. If I came back, if I opened their ground again, there would be no second lesson. I walked to my truck on legs that would barely hold me. The sun was setting behind the cloud, and it had lit the underside of it, a deep red, the color of something arterial. Tomorrow was the new moon. I drove straight to Silas Bear Runner's house because I did not trust myself to be alone with it. He took one look at me, standing on his porch, filthy and torn open, and shaking like a man with a fever, and pulled me inside without a word. You went into their place, he said. It was not a question. You went underground. I nodded. I could not manage anything else yet. He put me in a chair, He made me drink water. He waited while I got my breathing back under me. And when I could finally talk, I told him all of it. The chambers, the carvings, the rows of bones. Caleb Swiftbird laid out on that platform with his hands folded. Silas listened with his eyes closed, and when I finished, he sat without speaking for a very long time. "They showed you," he said at last. "They let you see what they are. That has not happened before. In every account I have ever been given, in every story the old people carried down, the still ones have never revealed themselves that plainly to anyone who lived to describe it." "Why me?" "Maybe because you carry that badge. Maybe because your grandfather walked that ground for 40 years and earned some measure of standing with them. Maybe because they wanted you to understand exactly what happens to a person who goes too deep." He opened his eyes. "Or maybe they are testing you, seeing whether you run or whether you finally listen. Caleb is dead. His body is down there, arranged like the rest of them. There are dozens of others, Silas. How long has this been going on? Centuries? Longer, probably. They have always been here, and they have always taken some of us. Not many, not often. Enough to keep us reminded that this country is shared and that we live on it by their allowance as much as by our own toughness." I thought about those rows, all of them turned toward the same wall. Why arrange them? Why lay them out that way? I do not know. Maybe it is their idea of respect. Maybe it is something we have no word for. Silas turned his cup slowly on the table. "Your grandfather had a theory. He thought they were preserving us, keeping a record of who we were, what we looked like, how we lived, the way we keep artifacts behind glass and try to understand the people who came before us." The thought settled into me and would not leave. So we are specimens, or exhibits, or neighbors they want to remember. The point is that we do not know and we cannot know. Trying to reason your way into the mind of something that exists outside the way we perceive, that is a road with nothing good at the end of it. Your grandfather learned that the hard way. He spent years trying to solve them. In the end, he understood that the only question worth answering was how to share the country with them. I have to report this. That family deserves to know what happened to their son. And you will tell them what, exactly? That you found his body in a stone chamber guarded by beings that do not entirely exist. That he is being kept in some kind of permanent gallery by watchers older than the hills? Silas shook his head. They would decide you were sick or cruel, or making up stories about their dead boy for attention. So I lie. You tell them the truth in a form they are able to carry. You tell them you found evidence that Caleb died on that ridge. You tell them his body lies in a place that cannot be safely recovered, and that disturbing that ground would be dangerous. Not one word of that is false. I hated it. And he was right, and I knew he was right. Some truths cannot be spoken straight. Some knowledge has to stay with the people who are able to hold it. The new moon is tomorrow, Silas said. You stay off that ridge for a week at minimum. They have shown you their house once. If you go back now, they will read it as a challenge, and they will answer it. What about everybody else? Hikers, hunters? Most people will not feel like going up there during the new moon. There is an instinct in us, something very old, that steers us away from places of power when those places are awake. But yes, there is a risk. You thought about it. Can you close the area? Some official reason. I can. Unstable ground. Risk of collapse. I let out a breath that was almost a laugh. That chamber could cave in on somebody. It is not even a lie. Do it. A week should be enough. I stayed at his house that night. I could not face my own walls. He set me up in the spare room, and I lay there staring at the ceiling and listening to the sounds outside the window, cataloging every one of them, terrified of the moment they might stop. Around 3 in the morning, I heard singing, soft and far off, in Lakota. The old words my grandfather used to sing under his breath while he oiled his boots. I got up and went to the window. The yard was empty, silvered over by starlight, nothing moving in it at all. The singing kept going. I could feel it in the bones of my face. Silas appeared in the doorway with a blanket around his shoulders. "They are acknowledging you," he said quietly, "marking you as someone who has seen their world and come back out of it." "What are the songs?" "I do not have a word for it. A blessing, maybe, or a warning, or simply a recognition that you are not the same man who walked up that ridge. I do not feel different. You will. Give it time." The singing went on until just before first light, and then it thinned away like mist coming off a river. I left after sunrise and drove to the station to file the closure. The building was empty at that hour, and nothing but me, and the groaning of a heating system older than my truck. I wrote the notice vague and official. Geological instability, risk to public safety, area closed until further notice. I was signing the bottom of it when I heard a whisper right beside my ear, close enough that I should have felt breath. "Wesley." I came out of the chair and turned. The office was empty. "Wesley, we are still watching." The voice was neither a man's nor a woman's, neither young nor old. It was like wind moving through a gap in stone, like the ground itself had learned to shape a word. I got my hand around the pouch Silas had given me and held onto it. The whisper faded out, but the weight of their attention did not. I filed the notice and locked the station behind me with hands that would not stop shaking. The next day was the new moon. I did not go near that ridge. I stayed in town and did paperwork, and pretended I was an ordinary man having an ordinary Thursday, and the whole time I could feel them out there the way you feel weather coming. Around noon, my supervisor came by, a tribal police officer named Grant Bluehorse. "You look like hell," he said, sitting down across from my desk. "You coming down with something?" "Just tired. Long couple of weeks. That search was rough. Family's taking it hard." "I know." "They want to talk to you. The parents. They heard you were the last one working up there, that you closed the area. They want to know if you found anything at all that might give them somewhere to put this." My stomach went tight. "When?" "Tonight, if you're up to it." I told them you had been running yourself into the ground. They are insistent. I thought about what Silas had said. The truth, in a form they could carry. "Tell them 6 o'clock. Wendell and Ruth Swiftbird lived in a small house on the eastern edge of the reservation. When I pulled up that evening, I could see through the front window that the place was full. The family had come together the way families do, to mourn and to hold each other up and to try to make a shape out of something shapeless. Ruth answered the door. She was in her 50s, with grief cut so deep into her face that it had changed the architecture of it. "Ranger Ironcloud, thank you for coming." Inside, a dozen people sat in the front room. Wendell, Caleb's brother, and 2 sisters. Aunts, uncles, both grandmothers. They all turned to look at me when I came in, and what I saw in their faces was hope. Hope that I had brought them an answer. Hope that I had brought them somewhere to set this down. I wanted so badly to give them that. All I had was a truth they could not survive and a version of it that would have to do. "I'm sorry for your loss," I said. "Caleb was a good man, a good hunter, a good son." Ruth motioned me toward a chair. "The police said you closed Wolfjaw. They said you found something." I found evidence that Caleb went deep into the backcountry, further than most people go. The terrain up there is dangerous, loose rock, hidden drops. I chose the next words, the way a man picks his footing on ice. And there is sacred ground in that area, old places, places our people have always been told to respect and leave alone. Sacred ground. Wendell leaned forward with his forearms on his knees. What kind? Stone chambers, underground. Very old, almost certainly pre-contact. The kind of place the elders have warned about for as long as anybody has been keeping count. I watched recognition move across the faces of the older people in that room. They knew. Maybe not the details. Maybe not about the still ones by name. But they understood that there are places on this reservation that carry weight, and that those places ask something of you. "Did you find his body?" Ruth asked. Her voice barely carried across the room. This was it. I found evidence that he entered one of those chambers, and I believe he is still in there. In a place where, and I had to stop and take a breath, where disturbing the ground, where bringing him out would be dangerous. Not only physically, spiritually, for him and for anybody who tried. The room went silent. Ruth's hands trembled in her lap. "So he just stays there?" Wendell's voice was tight and climbing. "We cannot bring him home. We cannot bury him properly." "He is in a place of rest," I said carefully. "A place that has been used for exactly that purpose for a very long time. He is not alone in there. He is not forgotten. But I believe bringing him out would break something that protects the rest of us." "The always," one of the grandmothers said. She was ancient, wrapped in a shawl, her eyes clouded almost white. "Some places belong to the spirits. Some places we do not go. Is that what you are telling us?" "Yes, grandmother. That is what I am telling you." She nodded slowly, and something in the room shifted. "Then he walks with the ancestors now, in their country, not ours." She turned her head toward Ruth. "You will have to accept it. He is past our reach, but he is not lost." The conversation went on another hour. Some of them accepted what I told them. Some of them fought it, wanted specifics, wanted me to explain how a man wearing that badge could walk away and leave a body in the ground. But the older ones in that room, the ones who still carried the stories, they understood. And in the end, they brought the others around. When I left, Ruth walked me to the door. "Did he suffer?" she asked quietly so that nobody behind her would hear it. I thought about the way that body had been laid out, the hands folded with such care, the face turned toward the wall with all the others. "No," I said, and I believed it. "I think it was fast. I do not think he ever understood what was happening." She nodded and the tears came, and she did not wipe them away. "Thank you for looking for him, for respecting the old places, for telling us what you could." I drove home feeling scraped out from the inside. That night I lay in bed and listened to the quiet. Real quiet this time. The ordinary hush of a small town after midnight. But I was aware of every creak and every settle, waiting for the other kind to come down. It never did. They were busy elsewhere, walking their ridge on the one night of the month, when the wall between their country and ours is worn thinnest. I started keeping a journal after that. Not the official log. A private record, the way my grandfather kept his. Every strange thing. Every time the quiet pressed too close. Every whisper of awareness that they were near. 3 days after the new moon, I took a call from a hiker who had walked past my closure signs. "There are lights up here," he said, and his voice was pulled tight as wire. "Moving through the trees, and I swear to God I can hear somebody calling my name, but I am the only person on this trail. Where exactly are you? He gave me a location. Ash Fork Creek, not far from where I had run. Listen to me very carefully. Do not answer the voices. Do not follow the lights. Turn around right now and walk back toward your vehicle. Move quickly, but do not run, and do not look behind you. What? Why? What is going on? Do what I said. Get back to your car and get off that ridge. I will meet you at the trailhead. But the voices, it sounds like my wife. She is saying she is lost out here and she needs help. I have to. That is not your wife. Your wife is at home and she is fine. What you are hearing is not real. Move. Now. I heard him start moving, brush dragging across the jacket. Okay. Okay, I am going. But those lights are getting closer. They are all around me. Do not stop. And whatever else happens, do not let the quiet catch you. The what? If everything goes silent, if the wind and the birds and the insects all stop at once, then you run. You run as hard as you can, and you do not stop until your tires are on pavement. You are scaring the hell out of me. Good. Fear is going to get you off that hill. I drove up to the trailhead and waited. 20 minutes later, a young man came out of the timber at something just short of a sprint, face bloodless, eyes too wide. He did not slow down until he had his hand on his car door. And even then, he kept turning to look back at the trees. "What was that?" he demanded when I walked over. "What is up there?" "Nothing you need to think about anymore. You are off it now." That is not an answer. Those lights, those voices, and the quiet. He pushed both hands back through his hair. It was like somebody muted the entire world. "Did anything touch you?" "No, I just felt watched. Studied, like I was something in a jar." He shook his head hard once, like a man shaking off water. "I am never coming back here. This whole place is wrong." That is probably the smartest thing anybody has said to me all month. After he drove off, I stood at that trailhead a long while, looking up at the ridge. The sun was going down orange and purple behind it, and I could feel them up there, sitting on the air like a change in pressure. 8 days after the new moon, I went back to the clearing. I had been putting it off, but I needed to see it. I needed to know. It looked exactly as it always looked. Stones in a ring, bare earth in the center. Except the hole was gone. Something had drawn earth and rock over the opening and packed it down. Not perfectly. Not enough to fool a man who already knew what he was looking at. But enough that nobody would ever find it by accident. I built a small cairn at the edge of the clearing. Nothing official. Just a stack of stones that any ranger who knew how to read one would recognize. Do not disturb this. Do not go deeper. As I set the last stone, I felt that pressure gather in the air, and I knew before I turned around. They were standing among the trunks at the edge of the clearing, less defined in the daylight than they had been below. More a suggestion of shape than a shape. But there. We regarded each other. Me in my uniform with my grandfather's medicine pouch under my shirt. Them in whatever it is they do, which is nothing, which is watching, which is waiting. And then one of them moved. Not toward me. Only a shift of weight that brought it fractionally more into focus. It was tall past anything a body should be, with limbs that ran too long and bent at counts that made no sense, and its surface was not a surface at all, but a distortion. The shimmer over a hot road, shaped like a thing that stands. It raised something that might have been an arm, and it pointed. Not at me. Past me. Down the trail that led back off the ridge. The message did not require translation. Leave. This is ours. I nodded once. An acknowledgement, if not an understanding. Then I walked away, and I felt them on my back every step until I crossed that invisible line and the ordinary world closed over me again. That was 3 months ago. Wolfjaw is still closed. I have kept it that way, citing ongoing geological survey work that I have quietly made sure will never be completed. Caleb Swiftbird's family held a memorial. They set a stone marker near the district hall with his name and his dates, a place to go and sit and remember him, since there was no grave to visit. Ruth thanked me for coming to the service. She looked more settled than she had that night in her front room. That grandmother was right, she told me. He walks with the ancestors now. I feel him sometimes in my dreams. He is not afraid. He is not alone. I did not tell her that her dreams might be more than dreams, that the boundary between where she sleeps and where her son is has always been thinner than anybody wants to know. Some knowledge is not a gift. Dale Prentice retired 2 weeks after the search ended. He told me over coffee that he could not do the work anymore. I keep thinking about those deer, he said. Not a mark on them. No reason. And I remember that quiet and that pressure sitting on my chest. And I know there is something up there that does not fit inside anything I was ever taught. He turned the cup in his hands. I cannot run search and rescue knowing that some of the people who go missing did not get lost and did not fall and did not freeze. They met something, and there was never going to be anything I could do about it. I understood him completely. Sometimes knowing a thing makes it impossible to keep standing where you were. Silas Bear Runner checks on me. He comes by the station once a week, always with coffee, always asking how I am holding up. You are doing better than your grandfather was at this point, he told me last week. He spent the first year drinking, trying to unsee it. You are facing it, writing it down, learning from it. That takes something. I do not feel strong. Most days, I feel like I am barely holding the pieces together. That is what strength looks like. Like from the inside. Real strength is not the absence of fear. It is being terrified and going to work anyway. The elders treat me differently now. When I sit in on community meetings, when I pass them at the district hall, they nod to me with a regard I have not earned through years or accomplishment. They know. Somehow they always know. Franklin Yellow Elk pulled me aside last month and handed me a second leather pouch. Your grandfather asked me to make this before he passed, he said. Told me whoever took his job would need more than one. Said the still ones would test him. I have kept it blessed all these years. It is yours. I wear both of them now. And I have stopped asking myself whether they do anything, because I have noticed that on the days I have them on, the whispers stay farther off and the pressure sits lighter. Maybe that is only my own mind doing the work. Maybe there is something in the old medicine that I will never understand well enough to explain. Either way, I am still here, still wearing the uniform, still driving the same roads and keeping the same watch. And some nights, late, doing paperwork or sitting out on my step with the cup going cold, I feel them. Out there on their ridge, walking their endless rounds, not hostile exactly, not kind either, simply present, aware, watching. They have not taken anyone since that hiker 3 months ago. They have not shown themselves again except that once at the clearing, when they told me to go home. But they are still there, still awake, still waiting for the next person who goes too deep, who opens what should have stayed shut. Last week, I got a call from a developer. Different company than Thornbury, same idea exactly. They want to survey Wolfjaw, soil testing, equipment, access roads. I told them no. Told them the area is protected, off limits, not up for discussion. They said they would take it to the tribal council. Said they had every legal right to explore development on reservation land. I told them good luck, because the elders remember, and they understand that some ground belongs to something older than any of us, something that was standing here first and will be standing here long after the last of us is gone. I sit in on the elders' meetings now. I started in the back, just listening. After a few weeks, Silas asked me to come sit up front with them instead. You carry knowledge, he said. Knowledge that has to be kept and handed forward. You are one of us, whether you feel ready or not. So I sit with them and I learn. Accounts going back generations. Other rangers, other hunters. Other men who crossed paths with the Still Ones and were changed by it, or were never seen again. Strategies for holding a boundary. Methods for keeping a balance that has to be kept fresh in every generation, or it is simply lost. And I have started teaching, too. When new rangers get hired, when young people from the districts come to me asking how to get into this work, I make certain they understand what the job actually is. I hand them my grandfather's notebooks. I tell them about Wolfjaw. I prepare them for something that no academy anywhere will put in the curriculum. Some of them think I have come loose. I can see it in their faces, that careful mix of pity and concern. They listen politely and then go back to a world where everything can be measured and explained and eventually controlled. But a few of them understand. A few nod slowly and ask real questions and take the warning for what it is. Those are the ones I watch. Those are the ones I keep close, because they will be the ones still standing when they meet something their training never covered. The Still Ones are not evil. They are not demons or monsters or any of the shapes we have been trained by film and television to be afraid of. They are other. They are different. They exist in a space that runs alongside ours and overlaps it in ways nobody is built to fully follow. And they are territorial. That is the whole lesson. That is everything I will pass down to whoever wears this badge after me. There are places on this reservation, and places all over this country, where the wall between one world and another has worn thin. Where things that should not exist by our physics and our logic still walk and still watch and still wait. You can live alongside them. Our people have done exactly that for thousands of years. But you have to respect the line. You have to honor the old warnings, the stories that sound like superstition, and are really survival instructions handed down so many times that people forgot they were instructions at all. Do not go to certain places at night. Do not disturb ground that was set aside. And when the quiet comes, when the world holds its breath, you leave. No questions, no investigation, no trying to understand. I wear my grandfather's pouch every day. His notebooks sit on the corner of my desk. I read the old stories now with a comprehension I did not have at 20. And every time I patrol the edge of Wolfjaw, I feel them out there. Patient, ancient, in no hurry whatsoever. Sometimes when the wind is coming from the right quarter, I hear whispers that might be my imagination and might be something else. Voices speaking in something older than language. Sounds that skip past the ears entirely and land in the part of the brain that still remembers when we were prey and the night held things with teeth. But I do not run anymore. I do not panic. I acknowledge them, and I keep to the trail, and I respect the line. Because that is the work. Not to defeat them. Not to drive them off. To coexist. To stand as the bridge between the people who forgot and the things that never do. My name is Wesley Ironcloud. I am a Lakota tribal ranger, and I walk the line between the country you know and the country that lives inside the quiet. The elders warned me about the still ones. I should have listened years earlier than I did. I am listening now. And on the nights when I am out under a moonless sky, when the wind lays down and the timber goes completely still, I stand in that quiet, and I finally understand what my grandfather wrote in the last entry of his last notebook. We are not the first thing on this land. We never were. We are only the ones who learn to share it. We live here with something ancient, something patient, something that watches and waits and keeps a record of every trespass. The still ones are here. They have always been here, and they always will be. The question was never whether they are real. The question is whether you are wise enough to live as though they are. He wrote that a man who listens can walk anywhere, and a man who only hears will walk straight into the ground. I have carried that line my whole life like a lamp, but I have had 3 months now to sit with it, and there is a second half to it that he never wrote down, and I think he never wrote it down because he could not bear to. They are listening too. They have been listening the entire time, to my boots on their ridge, to my voice on the radio, to every promise I made in that front room to a mother who deserved better. And whatever man says out loud on that ground, whatever he leaves unsaid, they keep it. Winter is coming to the ridge. Snow will fill the trails. Ice will seal the stone over those chambers. The still ones will draw back deeper into their own country, the way they always do in the cold months, less active, never sleep. And I will keep watch through the snow and the quiet and the long unlit nights, because that is what my grandfather did and what the men before him did, going back to the first of us who came into this country and understood we had not come into it alone. We are the watchers who watch the watchers. Wolfjaw belongs to them now. I am no longer certain it ever belonged to anybody else.